One of the most interesting technological launches highlighted this month with the introduction of Metaworks AL551 automatic optical biometer, with Grafton Optical named the exclusive UK distributor. What makes this device noteworthy is its ability to combine axial length biometry and corneal topography in a single automated platform, allowing practitioners to collect the key measurements needed for both myopia management and orthokeratology in one capture. The launch reflects a broader trend occurring across the profession, the transition from refractive error alone to axial length as the primary metric for monitoring myopia progression and treatment effectiveness. As more practices adopt evidence based myopia management, technologies that make axial length measurement more accessible, efficient, and repeatable may help accelerate this as the standard of care. Andrew, what can you tell us about this announcement?
Yeah, basically the last part is the bottom line. The more practices have this, the better. Um, you know, eh, the more practices that can measure axial length quickly and easily in their normal workflow, without a burden, without having to think about it, the more this is going to become mainstream, the more that everyone is going to benefit from it. And so, is this particular instrument God's gift to myopia? Probably not, but you know, it's another really nice thing to see. Obviously we already have similar combo units, so it's not the first of its kind or anything like that. Um, but the more we get, the better. Put this in every office, make it faster, make it easier, make it um, reliable, obviously, and the more it can be an afterthought. Oh, we're just going to get that data. We're not even going to think about it. The better everything is going to be. So yeah, I'm happy to see anything like this come across.
Well, I appreciate looking at the picture that it looked like it has smaller footprint. I mean, you and me know, like we've helped a lot
Hmm.
of doctors acquire some of those combo equipments and just, like Andrew, we just want people to be using it, right? But sometimes the instruments take up a lot of room and, there's a lot of offices where their pre-testing area is already filled with all the other devices. So I think there is a need for more, instrument companies to come into the space to continue to push, I guess, that level of how do we better integrate into the workflow for the doctor, but how do we also like come up with technology that doesn't require a lot of space, right? If we even look at the first visual field machine, Andrew, those are big machines that we're looking into. And now we have like the headset, right? So over time, I think there is an evolution of, instrumentation where it could be better integrated and seamlessly into that workflow. So kind of exciting that I think it's a UK that has access to this, but, I haven't seen this in the US, but again, excited that there's access to that for the practitioners out there.
Yeah, when I first looked at this announcement, I was like, "Okay, that's cool." But it's the standard of care thing, right? That's the element that really, as Andrew mentioned, and I love what you said, Priscilla. Like that's so true. When we would go to accounts to like work with a product, like, and you have to teach them how to do topography, and you're in this small space, and it's just like everybody's having to do this. That's definitely a key thing. And isn't it the Topcon Maya that already measures axial length and does topography, if I'm not mistaken? So this is not the first of its kind, but it does represent this move towards axial length as the standard of care. I guess my question is, like, 5 years from now, will it be possible to practice evidence-based myopia management without measuring axial length? Like, when does this become the standard of care? Because the reason why it hasn't is because obviously the cost involved with getting yet another piece of equipment, which this could potentially solve by bundling it together. And everyone says axial length is the standard of care. In my personal life, when parents say to me like, I'm interested in myopia management for my kid, what kind of questions should I be asking the office? I said, ask them if they measure axial length. That's the easiest way. If they don't, find somebody else. And if they do, here's some other things you can start to ask them. Keep it simple. Do they measure for axial length? It's the standard of care, or it will be very soon. So, when is that going to happen? Like, is that possible? What do you guys think?
Phew.
I'll let Andrew take it first.
Yeah, I'm not great with predictions. It's uh, I think it's I think it's coming pretty soon. You know, I don't feel like I'm that old, but I remember having this conversation about OCT and glaucoma, and I think that probably more doctors than not felt that when I graduated from school, OCT was not the standard of care for glaucoma. Now I think 100% would say that it is, and you know, I draw the parallel, but I think it's a little bit interesting too that these conditions are different. Um, there are absolutely eye doctors out there who say, you know, I'm just not interested in glaucoma. If I ever find somebody who has glaucoma or I think they have glaucoma, I'm going to refer them out. I've never heard a single eye doctor say that about myopia. It's just too common, too prevalent. If you're referring out 50% of all your patients, you don't have a practice. And so I do think this is a little bit different. I think this kind of changes things where, you know, even if OCT is standard of care for glaucoma, there are some practices that can still get away with not doing that because that's not what they do. I don't think people are going to be able to avoid this for myopia. I think it's coming. I think that the demographics are going to make it really tough to avoid much longer. I think that, again, the technology, the more options, the more competitive these are priced, the more, you know, the more you do not have to be a specialist to bring this unit in, the more prevalent it's going to become. And I think that's a good thing, but I also think that it's got to be sooner rather than later. I don't think this is going to be 10 years. I think you're probably pretty close on that 5-year guess.
Hmm.
Um, but I've been wrong before many times, so we'll see.
Priscilla, what
I
do
was
you
going to
think?
say, I am not quite as optimistic, but I think it's because I've spent so much time in the myopia space, like kind of trying to influence doctors, right, to purchase the equipment, to do more. And I think it's a very similar comparison to when ortho-k first became available, and there were doctors who were prescribing without owning a topographer in the clinic, and they were still doing that for many, many years. Like, I met an office that had done that for 15 years, right? Like, it was just one of those things where I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know how you're doing it, but it's definitely not standard of care, right? So I think it takes a lot to move everybody towards that direction. So I'm a little less optimistic about it for that reason. But I would say that, if someone is serious about myopia management, then I think they can look at how do they pay off that instrument, right? From the practice economic standpoint, and how does that enhance their care, right? Like, not everyone can afford to buy an OCT, but you could work your way there. So I do think that eventually it's going to happen for those who are taking it very seriously. But I don't want to, I guess, scare off those who are trying to enter into the space who are not quite ready maybe to buy it as well,
Mhm.
because I know just specifically for my site, we actually have a very tight correlation with refractive error and axial length in the 6-year clinical study. So, I always tell doctors, I'm like, hey, even if you don't have one of these, I want you to still start prescribing, right? We don't want to wait for you to have all the pretty toys to start talking about it, right?
Right.
Have the conversation. No single vision is not enough. Like, just start doing something. And so, I think in some of the more recent large online Cs, we've included this poll, like, how many of you own an axial link? And I would say that percentage still lingers around, like, anywhere from 30 to 40%. So there's such a huge, significant portion of doctors who are still not ready, I guess, to make that move to buy that capital equipment to include into their workflow. And, it's okay. But, if I had to predict, I think it would take us more than 10 years. But maybe as there's more instrumentation, there's more public awareness, patients are asking for it. I think they can, there's pressure from all directions to get doctors to start changing, how they're prescribing.
Yeah.
And I think also, like, when I look at these instrumentation companies, like, for example, Topcon, like, they're now leaning into Oculomics. Like, how do we use retinal images to predict other parts of the healthcare? And I think a lot of these large HMOs, like, they're going to move in this direction, right? How do we use the eyes to screen for those 270 different diseases, systemic diseases we can identify through the eye, right? So there's more of a medical model to begin with. So I think as that model starts growing, myopia naturally as a disease will also start growing, right? But I think one of the biggest challenges, I think also with talking to doctors, is that, they're not quite ready because I don't think patients will convert. They don't think there's enough of a demand to have that instrument in their office. But I think as more treatment become available, again, more awareness, they're going to realize that they are falling behind and patients may not be coming back, right? Most of us are maybe not tracking the loss of patients who go somewhere else and never come back, right? We just assume they moved, but maybe they're moving because you didn't offer myopia management in your clinic. And like Matt was saying, like you weren't measuring axial length and they found out through one of these online forums that a doctor who should be doing this or is doing this should have one of these devices. So they're making that decision on which provider to go to based on the availability of that number or instrument. I think those are definitely things that we need to be considering for those who are serious about myopia management and have the myopia mindset.
So
I love it.
I would say a couple things about that. So your 30 or 40% that have a biometer in your polls, I would also point out that's not 30 or 40% of a representative sample of the industry. That is 30 or 40%
Mhm.
of the people who consider themselves myopia people who are attending the myopia CE and who choose to respond to that because they probably disproportionately have a favorable thing to say. And so really the true number is way lower. I don't know what it is, but way less than 30, 40% of eye doctors have access to a
Absolutely.
biometer. But thankfully, I would also say that change doesn't happen linearly. There's a tipping point, and there are certainly some things that I could see happening. You know, if Luxottica now has their Stellest lenses out, and they want to sell those, and they decide that they're going to put a biometer in every Luxottica practice corporate location, well, now all of a sudden that changes everything because not only do all of those locations have them, now everyone who doesn't have them, it's an arms race, and that's a big problem if your competitor down the street has a major advantage that you don't have. And so I do think that whenever this happens, I think that things will tip much more quickly than they have been. But yeah, point taken. We're not close to where we need to be right now, and we shall see.
Andrew,
I think
as a oh,
absolutely.
go ahead.
I was like, I think when I was with you, Matthew, like I think Essilor and Luxottica actually does have their own topographer plus optical biometer. It's the reskin version of the Topcon Maya, but I think eventually as they're coming out with their Stellus 2.0 and you know building in like smart wearables as well, where you're having frames that can now look at compliance and lifestyle and those kind of things. Like it is going to tip the scales for sure. And I think it is making a case for the timing, right, of when all of these corporate locations have access to some of these. But again, I think there's a movement towards that medical model. So I think it comes along with that explosive growth that can occur potentially. But we know they've tried it before. So we'll see what happens this time around. But I definitely see that that is a focus for them.
Yeah. Um, Andrew, real quick, or maybe we can't do this real quick. Maybe we should do this in a future episode. But like, as a private practice owner yourself, like, how did you rationalize getting a piece of equipment such as measuring for axial length? Like, because it is such a big obstacle. If there's anyone in our audience who's like, yeah, I just can't justify, you know, purchasing that equipment. Was there some way that you were able to justify that as far financially for the practice?
Yeah, that's a good question. I I don't want to give any advice that applies to me, but may or may not be within anyone else's comfort zone. But for me personally, it's all about used equipment. You do your research, you find out what is a good device. You don't need the newest, fanciest, flashiest thing, um, and you can get eh, basically. If I could get a room full of 5 used pieces of equipment, um, I will take that every single time over one brand new, bells and whistles machine out there. And so some of these things can be pretty affordable and you can always upgrade later. When you use it more or when your cash flow is better, you can always go back and upgrade. There's never a time when you're just stuck. Um, and so, yeah, I actually don't think a lot of people realize, that that's even an option. Certainly there's some risk there. If you buy a used piece of equipment without a warranty, you need to know what you're getting into if it breaks down. But I think if you're intelligent about that, and if you do your research, do your homework, you're a little bit patient, looking for what you need. I actually think that many of these things, including a biometer, can be obtained um, much more inexpensively than a lot of people realize.
Mhm. Yeah, I
And I
mean,
would encourage a lot of private practice doctors to go talk to those reps, ask how much it costs. Because, I think in our last role, Matt, we would go around talking to doctors. And oftentimes when I talk to doctors about, equipment and how much the range it can cost, they're always like surprised or like, wait, I thought this cost like, whatever outrageous number because they have done minimal research in this space and they just assume that it's going to cost a lot of money to purchase one of these devices. So I totally echo, what Andrew's saying is look at used equipment, look at who's willing to donate. Because when I was in practice and building a myopia management clinic, there was a retiring ophthalmologist who was more than happy to donate his IOL master to us. Obviously,
wow.
it had way more bells and whistles than what we needed, and it was a big device, but we happily rolled that device around to the rooms, right, to do what we needed to do because it had it had the instrument. It gave us what we needed, the measurement, right? But I would say, yeah, start somewhere, start researching, have a number in mind so that you can at least work towards it, right? If you never do that minimal work of looking at a number and setting like a goal to get there, right? Or how does it physically make sense for you? Like how many patients do you need to see and things like that. And you don't do that math, then it's very easy to be like, wow, I don't think I can afford this. I can't pay this off. Like, but as we were saying, like you have a ton of myopes in your clinic. And if buying this instrumentation is going to help increase your conversion by 60%, like that's going to pay for itself really
Right.
quickly, right? And I think it's similar to what we see in our profession, the rise of everyone owning a RF machine or IPL machine. I was like, those are not cheap. Those are even arguably more expensive than an optical biometer and topographer combo. But like a lot of people are figuring out how to finance it, right? Because they see the vision of what it looks like to build aesthetics/dry eyes into their practice. I think it's very similar. The way we need to be viewing having some of these instrumentation for a myopia management clinic is do the math, figure out how to get there and plan for it, right? And sometimes your reps for some of these contact lens companies can help you kind of do the math, right? Or your business consultant can do that as well, or the rep companies, I'm sure, more than happy to help you figure that out.
Well, actually, if it's okay, I'd like to add one more thing that I've tried to work on. Maybe there just is no solution to this, but hypothetically, it should work perfectly. And that is get out and talk to your colleagues. And I have tried to expand my radius. Practice is close to here. I am totally fine with doing testing only. If my friend and colleague down the road wants to do myopia management, does do myopia management, but they don't have a biometer, send them over. They can do a test in our office, twice a year, 4 times a year, whatever they want. We'll charge them for the test, but we're going to give that patient right back to you. We don't want to take anybody from you. And now everybody benefits because you get the data that you want. You get to keep your patient. Everyone has more access to this stuff, and it helps me pay off my biometer, to do those things. And so, um, ODs are, I think, a jealous, protective bunch, and we're not going to solve that um, anytime soon. But that option is out there, and certainly, Matt. Actually, if you have anybody that you know of that has successfully done something like that, or structured a really nice co-management or testing agreement between ODs that everyone actually gets on board with, that would be one of the most beneficial things I could possibly listen to. Um, I don't know if it's out there. I don't know if it's being done successfully, but you'd have to think that somebody's bright enough to make it work. And I just think that would benefit everybody because now um, the whole point is out because you don't have to buy a biometer. You just say, "Hey, patient, I'm going to see you for your 4 visits a year here, but I want you to go to this other clinic, every 6 months to get your 20-minute axial length test done, and we'll collect the data from them." So that option's out there too. I'd love to see that utilized more. I'd love to have somebody in the area that has an IPL machine. To your point, Priscilla, um, if I had somebody close by that I could refer out for IPL and RF and all these things that I don't want to buy, um, sign me up.